We need civil discourse more than anything else at this point in time, it feels like. And the panel here actually they embody what civil discourse means in their everyday life, in their professional life, in their personal life. So I'm very honored to have them all here. Chief Brenda Gagne of the Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi, Melo Grant, Burlington City Councilor, Alan Minsky, the Executive Director of the Progressive Democrats of America, and Jim Zogby, founder of the Arab American Institute and a Sanders Institute Fellow. Please welcome our panel.
Thank you, Jane. I have been given the honor of opening this session because I have the key to civil discourse. Only talk to people you agree with. Or if you're going to talk with people you disagree with, do it on Zoom because it's so much easier to get rid of it. No, actually, Jane is right. We're living in toxic times. And most other folks got to talk about what they do. I am jealous because I only get to talk about how I do what I do, which is try to keep my sanity by engaging in civil discourse, because the chasms are so deep, and to waste your time shouting across it to no avail makes no sense, when in fact it actually seems harder, but it's far more beneficial to try to close the gap and come to some understanding. And I want to just share with you a few observations, both about the divides that exist, but also about how we can deal with them in some ways. Now, there's some people you can't deal with. There are people who literally are doing what they do for their own self-interest. I think of some of those members of Congress who went to Colombia, literally to incite. I mean, you talk about outside agitators. It was the speaker and a few of his colleagues who were the outside agitators at that event. There are people who do that, and they prey off of division to their own benefit. But for most of us, it's either a lack of understanding or a lack of empathy, and those can be dealt with. And I just want to share a couple of lessons first before I get into the two big divides that I want to talk about. Lessons from my mother and my late wife, both of whom helped mold me into the person I am. I remember when I was 13, I was very, one could say precocious to be nice, but I was a pain in the ass to be real. I'd get into arguments with relatives over everything from the interpretation of something in the New Testament to the politics of the day. And I was arguing with my Aunt Marie about something. I don't remember what she was saying because I never listened to a word she said. I knew what I was saying, which was the truth. And my mother said to me, she said, just be quiet and listen. She said, you're sitting at the end of your seat when she starts to talk. You've got your answer framed, and you don't even know what she's going to say. And her words were, if you do not listen to others, they will never hear what you say to them, because you're talking at them, not with them. The other thing she said was that sometimes when you get into an argument, you think if you raise the volume of your voice, it'll somehow close the deal. She said, don't be wrong at the top of your voice. You get louder, everyone else gets louder, and nothing gets heard. My wife used to come with me when I started on this venture of mine, the Middle East. We went to refugee camps in Lebanon in 1971 to collect stories of the Nakba. I was writing my dissertation on the trauma and what happened to Palestinian identity as a result of the trauma. And I came back to the States, and I was talking around at different venues about it. She'd sit in the audience. I would always speak to an audience of one. I'd look at her face the whole time because when I'd say something as a young person in their 20s would do, little off-color sometimes, language that was inappropriate or more agitated than one should be, thinking I was making a point by being a little more aggressive, she'd go like that. And we'd always count up the winces at the end. She'd say, that was a 7 wincer. You're getting a little better. Last time was an 11 wincer. I did a Bernie surrogate speech in when she'd had a stroke and she was in the hospital. And I only did one event, and that was this one to honor Jesse Jackson down in Greenville. She said, you got to go. And I went down to do it, and I brought the tape back for her, and she watched it. And after, she said, no winces. I'm getting better. Those are the lessons, actually. And what they all translate to is that people will listen to you if they like you. They'll listen to you if they feel you have something to say, and that if you're listening to them and care about them and want to reach across the divide and encounter them. So with that as a backdrop, let me talk about the two big divides. The first is something that we did talk about. A couple of the speakers mentioned, actually, I think it was your lieutenant governor, your treasurer. I forget which was which, but they talked about neighborhoods in West Virginia, in their community. I remember telling the exact same story to Bill Clinton in the mid-'90s, because he was talking about what do we do with cities. And I said, my hometown, Utica, had been 103,000 people, was down to 51 or 2,000 at that point. Neighborhoods were gone. The houses that were in the area where my mom was still living were empty. Each home had had three generations, the grandfather, the parents, and the kids. And they'd been there for, a generation already, and had fully expected to be there for 2 more or 3 more, whatever. That was the world they lived in, and everyone walked down the street 3 blocks to the mills. The mills closed. It wasn't just the jobs left. It was the families were destroyed, the neighborhoods became dilapidated, and not only the extended family broke, but the nuclear family felt stressed that it could no longer contain. And the community became ripe for all kinds of issues. I remember telling Clinton the story, hoping to get compassion. And what I got was, well, we're never going back there again. What we've got to do is job training. They need to be trained for the 21st century. And I thought, God, you do not know Mr. DeBrango. He's 62 years old. He's not going back to school. That's not what he wants in his life. Basically, he wants to be understood. I saw an ad on Pennsylvania during the last election. I forget who it was. It was a Republican, and he was walking toward the camera with a plaid flannel shirt on, and he's saying, my folks were union members and Democrats. And I grew up a Democrat, but they don't care for us. They never talk about us, and they don't care a damn about what we do. That's why I'm running as a Republican. And I said, I got nothing to say to him. I have no response to that. I had a fight at the executive committee of the DNC over the fact that the party pollster came after the 2014 election, in which those 6 years before then, we lost 1,400 state legislative, congressional, gubernatorial seats. We lost control of both houses of Congress. We lost control of the majority of governorships and legislatures across the country. That's what we did. And so and he said, but we did really well. We kept the coalition together. We won the black vote, the Latino vote, the Asian vote. We won the youth vote. All we got to do is win more of them. So I raised my hand and I said, I chair the ethnic council in the party. What about ethnic voters? What about the white working class ethnic voters of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin? They were the keys to our party's success in those states. He said, we're not wasting money, spending it, throwing it away, he said, on people who are never going to vote for us. And I said, with that attitude, we're handing them to Republicans on a silver platter, and we will never be nor deserve to be a majoritarian party because we're as bad as they are in that we are simply separating the electorate, ours and yours, and frankly, there's not enough of ours. Even if you get to 51%, you have to broaden the coalition. And his response was completely off the wall, and I came away thinking, we're doomed. Along comes Donald Trump, and we were doomed. I mean, because what happened was it was ripe for the plucking, and he plucked them. And I remember, Bernie, you talked to them, and it was perfect, but rest of the candidates didn't talk to them. So the issue was to understand those communities and speak to them. They're not deplorables. It's not either or. It's not, I understand this group or that group. We have to understand both. And as the speakers who talked, I think it was the first day said, as Les said yesterday, they are not off off the radar on terms of social issues. What they really want is somebody to talk about their lives, to talk about their families, to talk about their communities, to talk about their aspirations. And if we don't address them directly, we never get anywhere. And I'm being told I'm out of time, and so I'll come back later because I want to talk about the second divide, which is the divide over Gaza, and some of the issues that actually separate Israelis and Palestinians that do not have to separate if we knew how to talk to and respect both. But I will get to that later. Sorry, I went too long.
I'd be remiss if I didn't first say that at PDA we changed the time of our national staff meetings so that every week I could hear Jim Zogby with his coffee and conversation. If you can just explain to people when that is and maybe how people can sign up. And it is a great event, and at this hour of our history, world history, it is just, it's a great thing for the soul to experience. So how can people find out about
Just
that?
write to me, and it's every Wednesday at 2, and we do have a lovely community that comes together every week. And I'm really honored and actually excited every week to see everybody on Zoom. Just write to me. We'll put you on.
And I also want to start by saying I want to really thank Dave and Jane, and this goes into sort of the focus of my speech, at least the launching point, which I had put on my headline, Learning from Bernie, about communication, about reaching people with a positive vision and succinctly, but also this event. This is the third of these that I've been honored to attend, and all three have been brilliant. And we have so many organizations here, and a point of humility for our organization and everyone else is we have to be realistic. The Sanders brand, as it were, can attract such brilliant voices and such constructive conversations happen here. So let's all do what we can to support Jane and Dave with the Sanders Institute going forward. I love applause lines, but I have short time, so here we go. Okay. Look, I happened to stumble when Bernie was in England on a little presentation by Aaron Bastani from Novara Media, recommend that too, by the way, and he gave this very succinct sort of like literary analysis of a Bernie Sanders speech. And he said, in 25 words, Bernie Sanders can set up a clearly stated, well understood, simply stated negative critique of the failure of the status quo ante, one, and two, within the same 25 words, clearly stated, well understood vision of the better society and how we can get there through a very specific set of policies and a harmonized platform. And that's more than 25 words. And Bernie can do that over and over again. And I think one of the important points, I think, for left progressives and those of us who have a vision, we understand to be a vision of a society that is shared by a majority of Americans, talking about community, of course, bridging the divide. And we can look at American policies from 1933 to 1980. There are some failures, but amazing, amazing successes. And the fact that project was imported around the world. And if you look at the other wealthiest societies in the world, and they're democratic societies largely, they remain our Cold War allies. That the Roosevelt and Truman administration basically imported to the world a democratic, social democratic project. A little bit more about that a little later. And so again, in the last two presidential cycles, because of the power of that drama, the world, again, was reintroduced to an American politics that captured the imagination of people through a great communicator. And we have to understand, in the absence of that at the moment, right now, Bernie not being on the center stage of American politics, how do we collectively continue to convey that message in a way that is understood for its negative critique of what everyone is feeling, which is the failure of our current social and political economic status quo to deliver for the people in our society, the society that they want, and a very practical and attainable, through democracy, program that can achieve and return us onto a path, now this time fully inclusive, because we know it wasn't the last time around, right? Fully inclusive set of programs that are achievable through a democracy. So the other thing that is in the background to achieving that is, yes, succinct public messaging. It fits the 21st century. We're not going to achieve it through FDR's, radio talks, fireside chats. But it does have to have incredible substance in the background. So now here, I got 2 minutes to provide some substance, and I want to throw out 3 dates. 1992, 16 years forward, 2008, 16 years forward, 2024, where we are right now. In 1992, if anybody in the world who paid even remote attention to politics would have told you that democracy wasn't going to be triumphant and dominant across the world, liberal democracy going forward, people would have told you were crazy. The Soviet Union collapsed on the last day of 1991. In 1992, that was the end of history, right? Fukuyama, all that, the triumph of, as it were, Thatcher's Tina, supposedly, and Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom. Okay. 16 years forward, the economic system that was structured and in place in 92 and then really even put into the fast lane going forward basically collapsed, completely collapsed, a complete programmatic systemic collapse of neoliberal capitalism, Thatcherite Reaganite capitalism with the Blair-Clinton adjustment of the left parties to be in sync with them. Complete and total collapse, like a house of cards. Unfortunately, the U.S. Federal Reserve, of course, completely saved global capitalism as a system, and the strategies that were put in place through the American political system at the time were to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And the great sins of that model of capitalism were actually exacerbated going forward, even greater wealth inequality. We've talked about the housing stock, what happened to the housing stock being the anchor of the middle-class society as the United States built, okay? And we get to 2024. In 2024, we're in a crisis of democracy. 32 years later, after what would have seemed unbelievable, with 2008 as the middle moment, we have, with the redoubling down on a neoliberal, investor-driven, financialized capitalist model in 2008, we have now the public in full recognition of the incapacity of our social political system as it functions to deliver for anything except for the wealthiest. By the way, as Stephanie Kelton noted, with a very brief bubble of about 18 months to 2 years with the pandemic of a different model, proving again it still works, very much built around the 1933-1975 model of progressive Keynesian economics. Okay, so if there was true symmetry to this, the terrible narrative would resolve with the collapse of democracy in the flagship nation of democracy in 2024. We know how that would be produced by a result in November. But this has to be the year that that doesn't happen. It has to be the year that we save democracy, okay? And we also know what that means in November. And I just want to say, I personally believe at this hour right now, even without a presidential candidate representing, the particular program that obviously I'm hinting at, it is not the time to back away from that model. We have to actually double down and amplify a vision of American society in an economic structure, and yes, pretty much absolutely in line with the program of Sanders in 2016 and 2020, because people need to save the democracy to vote for something that will produce the society that they want. And this is not to say that there aren't better things domestically about the current administration than we've seen from previous administrations recently, but it isn't a full-on reformation back to a society that is absolutely anchored in the idea that the core program is a prosperous, low to no poverty, now fully inclusive middle-class society, and coming off of years in which to even keep your head above water, you needed 2, 3, 4 jobs, 1 job, 35 hours a week, 46 weeks a year, guaranteed vacation. How popular would that be with the American public? And that's all you need to have a living wage and a decent life. So people regain the possibility for their lives. Very succinct communication of a progressive agenda. I can say more about it, but I maybe should leave it there. And I will say this, at the convention, in coordination with Jim's organization and Rainbow Push and the Nation, we, PDA, will be hosting something called Progressive Central, where we'll be doing that. We think the compelling argument to save the democracy right now, very succinctly put, is to talk about what we can achieve with the democracy, even though it isn't necessarily on the table, as it's not on the menu to be chosen in 2024, but it cannot be chosen if there's no democracy. We cannot make the mistake that was made by the German people in 1933. As the progressive left, we have to align with constitutionalists and preserve our democracy. And because we can have no illusions about what the alternate choice is, which is to lock in place a wholly unacceptable status quo where we have basically oligarchic rule with no capacity for the public to reverse this level of inequality because it will be locked in place without the people having the option of democracy. We have a positive vision. We know what we have to achieve. We have to express it succinctly, lovingly, and paint a picture of the society that we all want. We have to learn from Bernie. Thank you so much.
So, saving democracy, yes. How do we do that? I guess where I come in is I talk about starting at the local level. My joke is I was a friend who showed up to volunteer for my campaign when I decided to run for city council. He had never worked on a campaign. He had never done door-to-door. Neither had I. I didn't donate. I knew about issues. I would vote. I would maybe talk about things with my friends, but I wasn't actively involved at the level that I should have been. And I found that within my campaign were people that were similar. We were slacktivists. And people came and said, okay, we're going to work for you because you're going to be different. And how was I different? I was previously a police commissioner. As we all know, public safety issues are a huge topic across our country. Burlington is no different. We have had some significant use of force lawsuits. The city has been under the cloud of use of force lawsuits going back to 2019. As soon as we settled one for $750,000, we got another one, black and brown bodies. I woke up because I looked at my kid and I said to myself, my kid is not safe walking around this city if he's hanging around with his friends and our police officers make assumptions of how they interact with each other, and that means they could be subject to be doing illegal behaviors. And we have data that backs that up. We have some pretty severe use of racial disparities in our data. And that's what woke me up. I served on a special committee to review policing policies. I was very quiet. I said, what is going on? I absorbed everything like a sponge. What are their policies? What are their directives? How do they train their officers? I was a sponge. I saw other left-leaning people who served on the community who were more vocal. I saw how they were treated. They were treated terribly. I saw more conservative members of the community have a relationship with our police department that was not appropriate. I was quiet. I just kept soaking it in. Then I put in the application to be on the police commission. And then I was like, I'm not going to be quiet. I'm going to ask questions. And I asked questions, and I've been told over and over again, oh, you shouldn't ask that. You shouldn't talk about that. Well, it's public information. People can look it up. You know, these filings for these lawsuits are public. People can read them. I'm just letting people know what's here. I'm just letting them know this is the information that's available to you that's going to tell you what's happening. I'm letting you know how you can find the data yourself. I'm letting you know where you can read the police chief's reports. I'm just giving people the information. Not my fault that people are seeing what's there, right? And I would still be quiet, but I was showing up in different places. I started watching city council meetings. I started watching other commissions. I started watching all these interactions. And then I reached the point where I was like, now I have to take this next level. Because it's also about power, right? Power at the local level so that your voice, they could dismiss me as a resident. They could dismiss me as a member of a committee. They could dismiss me as a police commissioner, but as a city councilor, still happening, but a little harder to do. So when we talk about saving democracy, it has to begin at the local level. I have been trying to engage the public with simple concepts of how do you know when your city council meetings are? How do you know when your planning commissions are? How do you know how to access these meetings? You don't have time to watch these meetings? Completely understand that. How do you access what the agenda was? How do you access the minutes? You may not be able to watch a 4 or 5 hour city council meeting, but you can go through the minutes in a fraction of the time to keep yourself informed. We don't communicate in that way with the public. We don't ask them to look at these meetings. It is done on purpose because it's always politics over people. And I always say people over politics. If we're thinking about doing the right things for our communities, we should be people over politics. That is what should be controlling the decisions we make in government. And people like that. People like, oh, you said something that everybody was thinking. One of the best things, we had a controversial argument about neighborhood code, updating zoning, and young people really responded to what I was saying because I'm talking about their future. Young people are just leaving Burlington, Vermont. The rent's too high. They don't see a future here. They don't see raising their families here. And by the time the data catches up to the mass exodus that's occurring over the next few months, what we will do, it'll be so hard to get them back. So for a young person to say, I know that everything that you were trying to push through, trying to get a more positive vote on, I know that it failed, but I had a seat at a table. I felt like I had the seat at the table. And that's what keeps me going, because there are days where it's exhausting, and I'm sure we've all felt that way. But you get that email, you get that person who will approach you in the supermarket, you'll get that direct message on social media. It's about giving people, reminding people they have a certain power. They have that power because people are giving up. And in the realm of public safety, with the number of people who are unhoused, with the number of people who are suffering from substance use disorder, and we don't have the sufficient resources, how do we get people to raise their voice so they can get their representatives at the local level, at the statewide level, at the national level, to make sure we get the resources that we need? Our high school has a great program, Burlington City and Lakes. The kids that are in that class learn about civic engagement. And I have had the privilege over the years of being invited once a semester to go and speak to them. And they get around in a circle at the end, and everybody talks about what they learned from the different guests of the day. And the last one I attended, young black teenager, he said with a very strong voice, he said, I learned I need to vote. And I was like, my job is done today. And so that's where I'm coming from. And I think we obviously talking in the larger context of things, but we have to be talking about at the local level and engaging people, engaging young people in a way that we're not doing, frankly. Thank you.
Kwei Nadoba, in my language, that means hello, friend. Before we start, I want to make sure that we recognize that the land that we stand on is sacred ground of my ancestors. So that's really important. I mimic everything that they say and do, except for I work for my people. We are the largest tribe in Vermont. We have fought the longest for state recognition in the state of Vermont. Discrimination has been very high for our people, still is, whether it's housing, whether it's medical, whether it's they just don't get us. So we're in the process of working with NMC and the University Health Center to try to get things in place so that they understand how to work with our people differently than other people. And that sounds kind of strange, but we have our own health issues that other people don't have that aren't being taken care of, things like that. So we're in the process of that. In the 1980s, we did a survey with the kids at school and found out that 70% of our kids were dropping out of school. So we put programs in place with Title VI Indian education. And the part of it was 50% were dropping out before 9th grade. Now we have less than 3% dropout rate We have 35 to 38% kids going on to post-secondary schools or technical schools. So my mission is making sure our kids are educated so they can have a better life than what we have. I teach them not to be ashamed of where they come from, but there's nothing wrong on wanting more, and that's really crucial for us. So, like I said, I wear a lot of hats, but being chief is my biggest job, and making sure our kids are getting what they need out of school, making sure that they're getting the education they need. When my kids went to school, they went to MVU, they didn't allow our kids into AP courses. My children took those courses because they had Gagne for a last name. They didn't have that core family names, that the Abenaki are known for, Missisquoi. So my kids got to do other things than that. Today, that's not happening. We've made sure that our kids are able to take the AB classes, making sure that they can get that extra, because our kids are pretty smart. Illiteracy is still in our area, but we weren't citizens until 1924. It was against the law in my lifetime to be indigenous until 1978 when the Religious Freedom Act passed as law. So I was being taught my culture knowing that my mother could be arrested. So there was a lot of things that happened that are injustice. And we are still the only people who have to prove who we are in this country and carry a card, even though we have Abenaki coming after us saying that we're not who we are. The state of Vermont, we did do what we needed to do to prove who we were. It was given and taken a few times, and now it's in there that's really decent. And the one Governor Dean gave us wasn't worth what you would have used for the Sears Roebuck back in the day, because it didn't allow us to sell our crafts. We could go to jail. There was a fine for that. And our kids couldn't apply for state scholarships. With the new one, we are allowed now to have artists be able to sell their crafts. Our kids can apply for state scholarships for Indigenous kids, which is crucial for us. It's never been about land. Bought my own. I work 3 jobs. We don't want to take, we just want to be recognized for who we are and what we do and the positive things. Kindergarten wasn't even in the state of Vermont. In 1982, Missisquoi Abenaki started the first one at the Swanton Armory. Then it became law that it became for every student to be able to get kindergarten in the state of Vermont. We were one of the first to have low-income housing in the state of Vermont, which we're pretty proud of. There's a lot of firsts that we've done. But I'm not going to take any more time. I'm going to hand it back over to the Gaza stuff, because that is major for us because of genocide.
Let me just tell you a little story. 2 weeks into the conflict, I had a meeting with a very top-level person in the White House who went on about October 7th. And I said, I understand. I understand that trauma. My mother, weird mother, she used to read me Diary of Anne Frank when I was a little kid. I mean, she wanted me to know the story and understand it. And I did. I tried to anyway. And so I told this person at the White House that I understand the trauma. I try to understand the trauma. I understand the feeling of vulnerability. The sense that this was a shock to a community that had never thought it would experience a shock like this again in their lifetimes. It evoked the Holocaust, it evoked the trauma of the pogroms and anti-Semitism, and it was real. I said, at the same time, I spent time in the refugee camps collecting stories of the Nakba, and I know that. I know the Palestinian community. I spent time in Gaza in the good days when it was a mess. Jabalia with no sewage. I mean, to see kids on a dry day playing in a pool and thinking, but it didn't rain. And it wasn't rain, it was sewage, because there was no way for it to get anywhere other than out to the sea. And I think about those kids. I said, I want you to understand that, that because of their history of dispossession, of disbursement, of being denied the right to claim their land and own and live on their land, they too have a feeling of vulnerability. This is the Nakba again happening for them. This person said nothing for a little while and then sort of show off, he rubbing his forehead like this. He said, I got to say something. He said, well, you just said smacks of whataboutism. You're just trying to justify October 7th. I said, no. I want you to understand there are two human groups here that need to be understood. And if we can't be the adult in the room, what do we get? We're going to get this thing playing out where the coat holder and cheerleader for one side, where we ought to be the guys who would say, let's stop it now because nothing good will come of this. And 8 months later, we're right where we were. Really no different, unfortunately, than where we were. And frankly, I'd like to say something good will come, but nothing good will come of this. It never does. 36,000 dead, probably much more. I think of 11-year-old kids, right, who, it's not just that they've been forced to move 6-7 times. We did a poll about how many times families were forced to move. But it's the sense that, when you're 11 or 12 and you live in a very congested place, you kind of know in your head, this is how I get to Aunt such and such. This is where my friends live. This is where the school is. This is where I go to whatever. That's all gone. It's like your history is completely erased, and any physical embodiment of what your consciousness had as your place in the world is gone. It's rubble. 70% right now of Gaza is rubble and unlivable. What do we do with that? Do we really think we eliminate Hamas? I used to say that violence is not the way to end the occupation, and violence is not the way to end the resistance to the occupation. It simply, one reinforces the other. The Israelis end up, Jesse Jackson used to call it, each side has the other in a headlock. And it's granted, one is far more vulnerable as a victim. I really believe that. Call me, biased for saying that. Palestinians are the bigger victims in this, and this is not a victimhood Olympics. But both sides are victims of each other and of themselves and the stupid choices they make. And in the Arab community, that sometimes gets me in trouble, because there is this sense, when you want to talk about shouting across the divide, there's the sense that unless you see absolute purity on your side, you have no business talking. But if I take that position, that I'm not going to be critical about Hamas and not just the stupid choices they've made, but the evil choices strapping a bomb on a kid and sending him into a pizza parlor is not armed resistance. A dear friend of mine, the mayor of Nazareth, used to say, when challenged about we have the right to armed struggle, he'd say, you have the right to armed struggle, but when you use it as badly as you do, you forfeit the right. And that's the truth. It is not about how many dead bodies you toll up, how much shock you create in the other, because the shock you create in the other ultimately reinforces the repression on your people, and that's not where we need to be. And the Israelis, the same thing. More dead Palestinians is not going to make them safe and secure. And frankly, I do not understand the choices that they make. I also don't understand the choices we make. And it's why, Bernie, you've been such an incredible ray of hope, that you and Chris Van Hollen and others and the 89 members of the House who get the fact that we have to be the grown-ups. We have to be the people to say, this is not working. And defense industries be damned. I know you're making a bunch off of this in Ukraine, but this is not what America needs to be. If we want job-creating programs, we don't have to have job-creating programs in the arms and defense industry. We ought to be producing something the world wants, needs, and can actually be better for. So I'm not going to get into the nuts and bolts. The name of the panel is Crossing the Divide. How do we communicate with each other? And frankly, there's a book I gave Jane a little while ago called The Wall Between, and it's about, it's two friends of mine in Canada, Raja Khoury and Jeffrey Wilkinson, a Palestinian and a Jew, talking about how do we understand each other? How do we cross the divide and get to the point where I understand your vulnerability, you understand my vulnerability. We get under each other's skin, like Martin Buber's I, thou. See the other not as an other, as a thing, but as a real person. If I don't understand the Jewish people's fear, if I don't understand their insecurity, I can mock it. Some people do. Oh, they didn't ever experience the Holocaust. That's like handed down generations. Yeah, well, you didn't experience the Nakba either. It was handed down for generations, but it's a defining piece of your identity that has to be understood, just like Wounded Knee was for Native Americans. It became a story that communicated and caught who you were and how you saw yourself. It was a symbol of your identity, just as the crucifixion is for Christians. I mean, it's like we all have stories that define us. The Nakba defines Palestinians, the Holocaust defines Jews. We got to understand that. And that's where we fail in this discourse, is we surround ourselves with our own truth and lock out everybody else's truth. And I'll tell you, I am so thrilled with the kids on campuses who I've had a time to get to know. You do not understand how courageous they are and how thoughtful and open they are to see Palestinian kids and Jewish kids do a Shabbat Seder in the midst of all this, and then have other call them anti-Semitic. That's just bizarre. It means that they don't want to understand. But to really get inside those kids and understand who they are and what they're trying to do with each other it's the way forward. And I'll stop there, and I hope I've done enough. But thank you so much for the opportunity.
Jim, first of all, I'd like to say again, Wednesday 2 p.m. every week, ET. It's incredible. And I'll try to be as brief as possible, and then maybe final comments from the other two panelists. But I do want to say we are in this very peculiar situation where in this election it is now understood that progressives and young people, our swing constituencies, are seen now as possible swing constituencies, not voting for the anti-democratic choice, but possibly not participating. But, okay, what positive can come out of this? Okay, broader point is this society is on the cusp, and Zablat and Zavitsky say this in their new book, a book I have some criticisms of, but they're right on the first point. This society is on the cusp of becoming the first ever truly multiracial democracy. Because if you look at the other extended democracies throughout human history, they haven't been multiracial. It's a struggle we know from all we know about U.S. history. And it's not a coincidence that the pushback is happening in terms of that context, along with the oligarchic structure of wealth distribution. So there's that. But also, the young people who will inherit, hopefully, yes, must be, our multiracial democracy, they want to use that democracy, Jim, to recast U.S. foreign policy. And we do have to make that a talking point of what we want as a progressive vision. And it has to be anchored around serious, real respect for all human rights. And I think in this context, absolute, adamantly demanding the full political and civil and human rights for Palestinian people and self-determination in land, okay? And also for everybody in the Middle East, right? In Israel and Gaza. And however that plays out, that will be determined by them, but that should be the U.S. foreign policy pin. But U.S. foreign policy cast around true respect for international human rights and solidarity. Solidarity, primarily with the balance of the population, working people, but international solidarity and human rights. And I think the young people today will be inspired by that and recognize, hopefully, that they need to preserve the democracy in order to get there, but to bring that back into a talking point of an aspiration for progressives.
Thank you. I mean, I'm going back to starting out locally, to starting out with the education of young people, education that we will have to do outside of our school systems, because we're not doing a good job of teaching civics in our schools. We're not doing a good job of teaching what's happening in the world history. The concept of history is under attack everywhere. So that has to be part of our political strategy. And when Merrick Broderick just finished his junior year at the University of Vermont. He won election this spring to represent Ward 8. He was supporting the encampment at the University of Vermont. He got called in with other students who were recognized around the encampment and were brought in by the University of Vermont for conduct, violation of their conduct. So universities, the very places that our young people should be learning about all of this, are acting in very conservative and very dangerous ways. I looked at what was happening at Columbia and other places, and when you think about at the peak of these encampments in early May, around the anniversary of what happened on Kent State, I mean, it's really sobering, and we need to keep that in mind. And myself and other counselors who are alumni of the University of Vermont, we signed a letter. We wrote and signed a letter and sent it to UVM, and we were like, this is not okay. You know, you can't, do you even realize that this is a city councilor? So, and the way he gets dismissed, oh, it's good to have a student on the council, as if being a student is, he doesn't have a right to speak, especially about climate, right? Which is the issue of his generation. How dare he, as a student, be the lead, a sponsor of a resolution on taking faster action on what the city can do to address climate. So it goes back to locally and getting down and saying, okay, how are we educating people? What do we do? What more can we do outside of schools to educate young people and pull them in and get them to be active? And how do we support the young people that are out there? Because you may have kids at home, you got to get home, you got to cook your kids dinner, you got to make sure they do homework. How are you able to support younger people who don't have that responsibility yet and can take these steps to have these issues be heard? Thank you.
Again, I mimic a lot of what they say. We did a protest at UVM about a month ago for the last symposium that they allowed to have. And we've had a pretty good relationship, Missisquoi has, with UVM over the years. But them allowing the symposiums to keep coming and trying to paper genocide my people and the things that are happening, our youth actually show up and they are protesting because it hurts them also. When people are judgmental and they think they know, that is an issue that is still happening. We've had UVM Summer Happening program for over 35 years at UVM. We pulled it 2 years ago, actually 3 years ago, I'm sorry, from the first symposium because our youth were being threatened because of what was going on with the Odenak stuff. And if our kids don't feel safe there, we had kids actually leave UVM to go to other schools because they felt that was the best thing for them. So we haven't done Summer Happening. We'll not be doing that until they can guarantee that our children, they're not children anymore, young adults, are safe. But if they choose to go to school, they should be able to go wherever they want to go. It shouldn't be because, oh, they're going to be treated better here than here. It should be straight across the United States, Turtle Island, that all youth have the right to get an education, no matter what political stuff is going on. And they should have a right to be able to stand up for what they believe in because it's their history. And that is important. Thank you.
Just one comment on education. My brother did a book about 2008. It came out. He called kids, instead of millennials, he called them the first globals. Because of the internet, because of social media, this is a generation that sees and knows the world and feels themselves a part of the world in a way that no other cohort had any concept of. I mean, they cry for places in the world that most people can't find on a map, and they feel it deeply. And they understand it. I mean, when I have conversations with some kids, they didn't take a course in Middle East history, but they know all the nuances and the dates and everything. The one thing that they don't know is a sense of humility about what they do know. And seriously, that's what education has to do. The universities are failing in that regard, is tempering what you know. Because no one, and maybe if I leave you with anything, it's that no one has absolute truth. We have a truth, and others have a truth, and the question is, how do I make you understand what I see in the world? Because we're not just living in a world of two different parties. We're living in a world of two different realities. I mean, people really believe this. stuff about a rigged election, blah, blah, blah. And people the point is we have to be able to understand and talk and converse with each other and temper that. And what the university should be doing, instead of punishing kids, is saying, let's have a conversation and understand.
Exactly.
Yep.
Let's understand the history. Let's understand the pain. Let's understand the truth of the other and find a way to converse. That's what learning is. Because they already know the facts and the reality of what happened. What they don't understand is how to fit it into a broader concept of history. And that's where I think universities fail. They're picking a side and punishing. Thank you.
Sure, you'd love it. Oh, yeah.
Thank you for the discussion. What my question will ultimately be is, how do we cut through genetic trauma to actually have discourse and see each other in one another? The context is that, and you could cut me off once you kind of see where I'm going. The context is that my grandmother is the sole survivor of her family of the Holocaust. My mom is the first relative she had on Earth after 15, 20 years. And these are arch liberals and humanitarians. We were at the 75th liberation anniversary of the liberation of Birkenau in January 2020. Not one reporter, nobody in Ron Lauder's crowd had any interest in what happened to the Roma. My grandmother burst in tears. We pulled reporters in, and she had to tell them about the liquidation of the Roma camp, the agony of the mothers, my grandmother going through the belongings of inmates to find candy to throw over the fence, and then the, what she described as the sweet, rancid taste of thousands of burned bodies. But now when it comes to this current crisis, I see, particularly in my mother, such genetic trauma. I don't want to make it sound like she's a histrionic woman, but I see genuinely there must be such high cortisol levels, such a fear that this is going to be another, mass death moment for the Jewish people, that this incredibly politically progressive and self-sacrificing woman cannot see that this is, a repeat of genocide and the genocide prevention that she raised me to be so vocal and mobilized around. So anyway, I suppose it's ultimately a personal question. I want to be able to talk to my family about it. Do you have any recommendations?
Genetic trauma is very real. Black people, we are born with PSD as babies right out the womb. PSD from slavery, from the history of racism in the country. So genetic trauma is really real, and it's measured within our bodies. Like when you can do tests on people, and they can be a numerical age, but their physical age is different. And I was reading a study about black male teenagers who would be 16, but their physical body, because of their stress, put them in the mid-40s. What you bring up is real across so much. And it is about, and this is sometimes something I struggle with when we talk about remaining calm. There are some people in this room who have seen me when I've been heated, but and you lose people. You lose people when you, as we were talking earlier, you go here, they go here, you go here, you get the, and pretty soon, no matter how loud you are, nobody's listening. But I think that we have to touch our humanity, and I think we have to touch and reach our empathy through the fear. And that's how we survive and get to a better place. And it's not easy. And it's not easy. I think we have to say what's happening now will not guarantee peace. As a matter of fact, it's pretty much guaranteeing there'll be no peace in probably our lifetimes.
We call it intergenerational trauma for Indigenous people. We didn't have residential schools here, but we had the Weeks home. We had the Warner home. We had St. Joseph's. We had, there's the Brandon School, the Waterbury, the mental institution. There's so many things that my own family have been part of. My family's been part of eugenics for this state that they passed. That stuff doesn't go away. What we try to do is keep building forward and so people understand where we're coming from. I think that's the most important thing when it comes to any kind of trauma that's happened from generations, is educating people. So if we educate, it won't happen again, right? That's what we're hoping. Genocide happened here before it happened overseas, right? So just putting that, and it's still happening. We still had we had Native women sterilized in 1978, almost 5,000 of them without consent. So there's still states in this country that allow sterilization, which baffles my mind to think we're in 2024 and they still have those laws in place in states. So that's what I would say.
I would just also say at PDA, one of the things we're doing is we have this architecture of a 21st century economic bill of rights. Underneath it, we have these addressing of poverty programs that are where there is concentrated endemic poverty in the United States of America, so concentrated in communities of color. The racial wealth gap is a continuation and exacerbation of the trauma and the levels of poverty. And all people who want to see a just society in this society, in a multiracial democracy, have to address the deep endemic poverty inside Indigenous communities and work with community members to lift up into the prosperity level of the general society. That's also not irrelevant in Israel and Gaza. I don't know how many people are familiar with, Land for All, Omar Bartov's advocacy that's had some traction in American media. We brought him onto a PDA town hall. I, of course, believe that the people in the Middle East and their self-determination, but I will point this out around Israel. And I'm a secular humanist, not prone to supporting ethno-states as such. Obviously, here I am praising the concept of a multiracial democracy in the 21st century. However, the modern state accrues to itself the monopolization on quote-unquote legitimate violence, right? That's how the modern state, police forces, and the military. I do not believe that the Israeli Jewish population will ever negotiate that right for Israel in our lifetime because of the history of 20th century Judaism. And so we have to realize that, even if you are prone to want to see a one-state solution, for instance, I don't think that's going to be given away. It has to be then accorded to the Palestinians. Okay, so again, look up Land for All or Omar Bartov's advocacy around what is sort of like a 1.5 state confederated solution. But again, I think the prosperity of the Palestinian people approximating the level of the Israeli people, who believes if that's achieved that there'll be this level of violence? And that should be an international project, I believe in.
I personally think what you were talking about is a more personal than a political thing, and I do get that, and I feel strongly that in my experience that any kind of political approach to that doesn't do it as much as something happens in people's lives where they open and change. Sounds airy-fairy, but I've seen it too many times where somebody will be as hard as a rock in one place and then wake up someday and say, I don't feel that way anymore. They may not even say they don't feel that way, but they do. Conversations change. People begin to open up and see a different reality. It does happen, and I'm seeing it happen more and more in this particular as much as the lines got drawn and the division got so deep that we thought it would never. In the middle of all that, I also saw a lot of people make change and begin to think differently. And so I feel that pain and the hurt that you're talking about. And And I think just continuing to talk about it and try to help people through it. Sometimes I hope that God, actually that heaven is a big couch, and God has a notebook and a pencil, and he says, just tell me about it. Because we all kind of need that, right? Just because we're all shaped by trauma in different ways. And the getting through it is the most painful part of all.
Thank you so much. You mentioned it's not necessarily political, that it's more personal, but listening to all of you, I hear very much that all the political decisions arise from the personal, and that if we all just could try to understand each other a little bit better and to recognize that we are all the other to somebody else. Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a really thought-provoking conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We are going to take a 5-minute break, and we're going to be here, and Josh Fox, who is an Emmy Award-winning director, is showing us 2 of his film trailers. Oh, and he's got his banjo.
I can just go. Right
you don't
now.
even have to leave. Do you need 5 minutes, or you want to just move right into it? Okay, let's couple of minutes. And we're going to be hearing from, well, I'll introduce you later.